An expert quoted by The Hill said this disconnect can have catastrophic consequences for young men. Quote, in the worst case scenario, the young American man's social disconnect can have tragic consequences. Young men commit suicide at 4 times the rate of young women. Younger women are largely responsible for rising rates of mass shootings, a trend that some researchers link to their growing social isolation.
Said I had a close one yesterday.
CNN had a video that talks about why the rate of single men in the US looking for a date has declined. Lions, let's take a look at this one because it has some bad news for younger lions out there.
Last week, I delved here into recent data from the CDC suggesting major problems with regard to the mental health of our adolescents, surges in depression and suicidal ideation, especially true for our girls. This week, I found cause to worry about young men. This headline from The Hill, it caught my eye. Most young men are single, most young women are not. The story reported that as of 2022, Pew Research Center found 30% of U.S. adults are neither married, living with a partner, nor engaged in a committed relationship. Nearly half of all young adults are single. Now, look at these numbers. 34% of women, twice as many, a whopping 63% of men. What explains that? I pulled the Pew study and I read with interest. Turns out since 2019, the share of single men who say they're looking for dates or a relationship has declined from 61% to 50%. In 2018, 28% of men ages 18 to 30 reported they'd had no sex in the past year, compared with 18% of women of that age. The Hill report said men in their 20s are more likely than women in their 20s to be romantically uninvolved, sexually dormant, friendless, and lonely. They stand at the vanguard of an epidemic of declining marriage, sexuality, and relationships that afflicts all of young America. Among the causes, among the factors, a reliance on social media and online porn. But also, more young women are hooking up with each other or dating and marrying slightly older men, and heterosexual women are getting more choosy. Other troubling statistics about men come from a 2021 study from the Survey Center for American Life. They found the share of men who have 6 or more close friends, which in 1990 was 55%, by 2021 had shrunk by half. Meanwhile, those with literally 0 close friends, which stood at 3% in 1990, has zoomed to 15%. An expert quoted by The Hill said this disconnect can have catastrophic consequences for young men. Quote, in the worst case scenario, the young American man's social disconnect can have tragic consequences. Young men commit suicide at 4 times the rate of young women. Younger women are largely responsible for rising rates of mass shootings, a trend that some researchers link to their growing social isolation. Well, those words reminded me of a conversation that I had over a year ago right here on CNN with NYU professor Scott Galloway.
But the issue is, when you have a group of men, the lower half of attractiveness of men, and online dating, which has doubled, now it's about half of relationships, and the top 20% of men in terms of attractiveness get about 60% of the interest.
Does anyone see a grave problem for our society if the trend being talked about continue into the future? Let me explain something to you. People need to be around other people, whether that's family, friends, girlfriend, wife, husband, or children. We are not built or designed to live our lives alone, contrary to what you may have heard from some people in these social media spaces. People who claim to be happy by themselves are lying to you and themselves. Yes, there may be a period in a person's life where they just don't want to be bothered by some persons, but they also have other people they keep in touch with. They are not completely alone, as they like to claim in these YouTube, TikTok videos. Today, most of these young people are meeting not in social gatherings in the real world, like churches, bars, and such, but they are meeting online in the comfort of their home. This can be especially bad for men. Why? Because these men go online to find dates from a group of women who are only interested in a smaller group of men online. That would be the hot guys. The hot guys, the six-figure guys, and the 6 feet tall guys. So most of these men will never get a date.
And then, Scott, you toss in the influence of social media and how relationships today, they don't come from, in our era, happenstance and mingling, right? They come from swiping, and that further accelerates this issue. Am I right?
Oh, it's been the chaser to it. I mean, to have an honest conversation about this, we have to be honest, and that is that men and women have different mating criteria. One quarter of men saying economic viability is a key criteria in a mate. 3/4 of women say that is important. And when you're on a two-dimensional format, where now it's 1 and 2 relationships begin online, it used to be 1 and 4 just a few years ago, it gets distilled down to a small number of criteria. Specifically for men, it's does she look attractive, and specifically for men, is he able to signal his ability to garner resources in the future. An average attractive male on Tinder gets swiped less than 1% of the time, and there's 3 men on Tinder for every 1 woman. So you've distilled it, you've taken out one of the key components of mating dynamics, and that is vibe, humor, body language, pheromones, the ability to be, quite frankly, a little bit persistent in the pursuit of a romantic relationship. We have no third places anymore, no places to meet. People aren't going to bars, they aren't sports league, they aren't going to church, they aren't even going to work. So it gets distilled down to very 1 or 2 dimensional attributes. And the reality is women are much choosier than men, and they can apply those screens, and they allocate all of their attention to a small number of men that results in just essentially at the end of the day, a lack of opportunities. Chris Williams summarized it perfectly. He called it the high heels effect. In the last 40 years, more women have graduated from college than men, and they're not interested in mating with non-college grads. They now own more homes, single women, than single men. So what you have is women say they won't date anyone shorter than them, 50% of them. Effectively, what you have metaphorically over the last 40 years is women have been getting taller and taller, and men have been getting shorter and shorter. How many of us have said, I know a ton of great single women, they can't find a date? That's not true. They can't find a date. They can't find a man they find economically or emotionally viable. If we don't make a massive investment in young people and make more economically and emotionally viable men, we're going to see a lack of household formation, we're going to see a decline in the middle class, and we're going to see, quite frankly, just a lot of young men who are terrible citizens.
The most attractive guys are getting all the attention on these dating apps. The problem is they are not the majority. So most men never get any attention from women on these apps. And due to the app's prevalence, these men do not learn how to mingle and socialize with women and other non-family members. Men's role in our society has not changed, while women's role has. Back in the day, women didn't work as much, and now they do. The issue now is that working women expect a man to maintain the same role his great-great-grandfather had when he was living it with his wife or lady. But she, that's the modern day lady, she will not be like the man's great-great-grandmother. That is not fair to the man, and he will eventually check out of the system. Men don't want to be looked at only as a wallet to be used and thrown away when the money runs out. It makes sense to them to be single than to be in a relationship. Not to mention how his life can be upended if he enters into a marriage and it fails. Personally, I don't see a solution to these issues until some laws are changed, and most of us people living in this world have more realistic relationship expectations from each other. Hold tight, gone again.